Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Glenn Adamson. I'm the curatorial director this year and next year for Design Miami. Welcome back to the Talks program. We have an unsurpassed gathering of curatorial talent here. We have so many fantastic curators in the room that we couldn't even fit them all on stage. So we have some amazing folks on stage and also an amazing person to lead the conversation, James Zemaitis from R & Company, who proposed the idea of having a panel about museum collecting practices today in the design field. And then we thought about who we might bring together to speak to that topic and came up with this amazing group of people who James will introduce to you in just a minute. I just want to say that the talk is being filmed. So tell your friends. It will be on the Design Miami website next week once we edit it. And also do be aware that we're filming during the Q&A as well, but there will be time for questions at the end. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to James Zemaitis from R & Company.
Thank you very much, Glenn, and welcome. I'm going to dispense with the usual long-winded formal introductions, and in fact, I'm going to introduce each of our four curators with a single opening slide as we proceed down this way, and then we'll start to get a little bit more freeform in how we do. So without further ado, because we have a lot to cover, we have, what's really exciting about this, when Glenn and I sort of put this together, is there are museum curators in the United States who are fairly regular in terms of their attendance at Design Miami and are here either every year or every other year. And then we have some curators who are not. And so we really wanted to diversify that. And so our first contestant, making her first ever appearance at Design Miami, a warm welcome to Jen Padgett, who is the Windgate Curator of Craft at Crystal Bridges. It's a relatively new position at the museum, and Jen has been a curator there much longer than that, actually, for about 7 years, previously in their American art department. I first met Jen a few years ago when I visited Crystal Bridges to see the remarkable Crafting America exhibition, which she co-curated with Glenn. And Jen holds a PhD from Washington University, her BA is from Notre Dame, and this slide is a little bit different than the other slides that you're going to be looking at today because we thought it might actually be informative to talk a little bit about what Crystal Bridges even is, because there is some, I think, misconceptions about what they collect. And it's interesting because when you look at the slide here, I actually think you chose a slide, Jen, that sort of epitomizes what the public does think Crystal Bridges is. You have your Charles Wilson Peale portrait of Washington. You have Rosie the Riveter by Norman Rockwell. You have Kehinde Wiley. Unbelievable masterworks of American painting and sculpture. But it's a little bit more than that, and obviously is reflected by your title there. Tell us just a little bit about your role at the museum and what you're collecting and how that fits in with the overall image of the museum itself.
Thank you so much, James, for that warm introduction, and also for letting me put in this slide, which I hope is an enticement to folks who have not visited Crystal Bridges, which is located in Bentonville, Arkansas. So a place that is really special and really about growth and being very dynamic. We opened in the year 2011, so we just celebrated our 13th birthday. And we're set on a campus that is around 120 acres. So there's both gallery spaces indoors and a temporary exhibition program, as well as outdoor spaces with trails, sculpture, really a place where you can come and spend the whole day exploring and still have other things to see. So the acquisition of a Frank Lloyd Wright house is something we didn't include in the slides, but...
From the swamps of New Jersey.
Exactly. See, we needed to bring some from New Jersey to Arkansas. It was in
a floodplain, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it was moved brick by brick, but that idea of having exemplary works across different media is something that we're really increasing in our focus. So opening with that canonical focus on painting, sculpture, photography, works on paper. Within the past few years, we've really been amplifying our efforts to bring in works of a range of different materials. In our curatorial focus, the way that the department was shaped before my position was formed was largely by time period. That you would have the curator of early American art, the curator of modern art, the curator of contemporary art. And with my position, as well as a new position for a curator of indigenous art, Jordan Poorman-Cocker, who joined our institution last year, having these positions that have a subject matter focus. But to our public, and we are all about welcoming all and inviting in people that have no knowledge of art history or design, that might think that museums are not places, quote unquote, for them, to have a really meaningful experience means that we tend to deprioritize those kind of hierarchical categories across materials. So when somebody comes into the galleries, it's not you're entering a gallery of painting, you're entering a gallery of craft. It's about how do objects relate to each other and help people have an inroad to understand something about the way artists were working or American history. So in our plans, because even though the museum is just 13 years old, we have a major expansion project very much underway.
It's a behemoth of a building. I mean, and that's the original part right there. I mean, yeah.
It's adding another 100,000 square feet of space to the museum, which is about a 50% increase. So if you've been to Crystal Ridges, you should come again in 2026 when the whole of our existing galleries and then these new galleries of both permanent galleries and temporary exhibition will be open to the public. We're in this moment of rethinking things, and then also in that moment of thinking about how important new acquisitions that we've made in the area of craft, design, all of these connected kind of categories will be on view, woven throughout the experience of the galleries.
And we're going to be looking at a few of those as we head on through. Thank you. Also making her Design Miami debut, Nonie Gadsden is the Katharine Weems Senior Curator of American Decorative Arts and Sculpture at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, where she has been plying her trade for 20 years now. But I first met Nonie, and there's always these wonderful interconnected things in the curatorial world. I first met Nonie 21 years ago at the Milwaukee Art Museum, when she was in your first museum position, I would say, as an associate curator of American design. And she shared an office with Glenn Adamson, whose show on an industrial designer whose name I can't even remember.
Brooke Stevens.
Oh yeah, Brooke Stevens, I saw. But I actually didn't know Glenn. I remember, but I went to see the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile that you had out there. Nonie has a BA from Yale, her MA from Winterthur in Delaware, which is a traditional training ground for curators and scholars in American decorative arts. And I think for many years, Nonie has probably been best known for her work in American design from the late 19th century to the Second World War. She oversees one of the very best collections of American modernism from the 20s to the 40s and has published a book on it. She's written about Tiffany Studios, the American arts and crafts movement. But over the past, better half of the decade, Nonie has won national acclaim for her work on American women artists and designers with an increased, focus on post-World War II figures. She oversaw the monumental exhibition Women Take the Floor, which was the MFA Boston's reinstallation of their American modern and contemporary art galleries, which basically moved all the guys into storage. And since then, well, Nonie has been systematically focusing on adding diversity into the museum's holdings, and I'd say redefining the institution's traditional focus on sort of, dare I say it, like American patrician and colonial art. Which leads us, of course, to one of these radical rethinkings, this Lina Bobardi bowl chair, which this is the only slide in the exhibition, I promise, that has anything to do with R & Company. But this, we made the transaction. It was a wonderful thing. But why don't you talk about where you're headed with a work like Lina Bobardi and how you're changing your rethinking of the galleries right now?
Well, Thank you, James, and thank you all for coming today. That was way too generous. I should bring him along all the time. It makes me feel great. But there are a lot of us that are working at the MFA to really get out from the stodgy sort of reputation that the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston may have, and doing some really great work at it. I will go back a little bit. When I started at the museum 20 years ago, I came on board to help prepare for the opening of the Art of the Americas wing. I work in the department Art of the Americas, North, Central, and South. That was really a name only when I got started in 2004. We didn't have much that represented other areas of the Americas, but we started growing that collection. We had a fabulous Ancient Americas collection, and so we sort of built from there. When I came on board, we also had a fabulous craft collection, studio craft collection, that was started in the 70s by one of my predecessors, Jonathan Fairbanks, a real visionary in collecting studio craft. But he made a conscious choice not to collect design. He wanted to collect the hand of the maker. And he only collected design when he thought it was a prototype. And I would say thought it was a prototype, many of these works. But so when I came on board, it had already been decided that we were going to have 2 galleries in the new wing on 1920s and 30s art and art and design, and 1940s and 50s. And they said, find that, which was a wonderful challenge. We're very fortunate in Boston to have a fantastic collector from the 1920s and 30s, John Axelrod, who gave his collection in promised it in 2008. And that really took care of that gallery in a major way. It's a fantastic collection of works from all over the 1920s and 30s, from the high style to the sort of mass manufacture.
Machine age.
Yes,
yeah.
Thank you. But the 40s and 50s, we didn't have that great angel of collectors out there. So what do I do? How do I start building this collection? And one of the basic things I started doing was going around and just anybody who would listen, I gave slide talks and basically said, this is the sort of thing we're looking for. Because if people don't know we're looking for it, why would they come? They've never seen design at the MFA. How would they know we were looking for it? And so I went out and I had people come up to me after talks and just say, oh, I have one of those Eames chairs that I bought as a sophomore at the University of Miami in 1945. Would you like that? Yes. Yes, I would. Thank you. And it sort of built from there. We tried very hard to build off of the few pieces we have and to connect with our craft collection. So one of the things about being in an encyclopedic museum is not only filling gaps, but doing it in a way that connects with the rest of your collection. So you can have conversations across the collection, both the Art of the Americas collection, but also with other collections within the museum. The Lino Bobardi chair was something that I went to James when I was working on building the Women Take the Floor project, and I said, I want a Bobardi chair. And he said, yeah, good luck. I'll keep an eye out for that. We did not get it in time for Women Take the Floor, but about 2 years later, you said, we have a bite on one. And I was really excited because I love her work. We are Art of the Americas. This was our first foray into Latin American design. And we decided to go big. And this is a fabulous new acquisition that this picture makes it look all perfect. It's now in our conservation studio, getting the upholstery sort of propped up a little bit better. But we are keeping this upholstery because I like the age of it. I want to show that the piece is not a new reproduction of the work.
And it's also interesting, of course, because it's so rare to find anything in its original upholstery. This is not its original upholstery, but it's an older upholstery. So there's character and flexibility
and it was done
there.
in the manner, stayed in the same family, and they did it in the manner of the original upholstery. So working through things like the little wraps that are you see the little wraps on the bar, figuring out that those are not in the prototypes that are in all the pictures that Lino Bobardi is, but then when it started being mass produced, they realized that the bowl was starting to slip anytime somebody got in it, and they needed more friction. So trying to figure out how those were made, when those got introduced, I probably around 1953 when it went into serial production. But that's the sort of thing that I'm working with colleagues both at our company and elsewhere to try to learn that. But the point is that our collection, and particularly the collections that have been at the MFA and have come to the MFA, tend to be male focused, just how it is. And so you really learn your gaps in your collection when you try to do a show as with such a silly premise, women, all women, like that's anybody has in common. But it really brought to focus what we were missing and gave me an opportunity to start trying to fill some of those holes.
And and we'll talk about it a little bit later, hopefully, but I love the other thing that you just brought in, the whole idea, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing this here. Many of you in the audience are curators, others here are artists, but there's also others here who are just collectors and enthusiasts, and the whole idea that you can actually have a relationship with one of these curators. You might be able to find a piece that they actually want. It isn't about value, it's about what it means to that museum. Our third curator is a fairly regular, long-time design Miami visitor over the years.
I was here at the first edition.
Whoa, back in like 2004.
Oh.
Cindi Strauss. I've also known Cindi for a solid 20 years. Cindi is the Sara and Bill Morgan Curator of Decorative Arts, Craft, and Design, and she's also the Assistant Director in Programming with her focus at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, where Cindi has been and is celebrating your 30th anniversary, which is outstanding in the museum world.
I was a baby.
I mean, Cindi has a BA from Hamilton, and interestingly, she has her MA from the Cooper Hewitt in New York. As we'll see, three of our curators here come from sort of like three of the big incubators for American curatorial talent at the master's level. Cindi is a design history polymath, and the MFA Houston's encyclopedic collection of international design and craft reflects her talent for making transformational acquisitions, including sizable donations of entire collections in various genres. She's curated over 30 shows. And it's funny though, but I think within the Design Miami context, you're probably best known for your passionate support of radical and contemporary design, from Gaetano Pesce to, for example, what we see here on the slide right here with Joris Larman. So, I mean, for your first slide, you certainly picked two absolute blockbusters, both Dutch, past and present. Your choice as to where you'd like to start on these two.
Sure. Thank you, James. Like Nonie, I work at an encyclopedic museum. And so our institutions, and I would say the High as well, are unusual in terms of the fact that when we integrate decorative arts, craft, and design into our larger gallery presentations, that's not really the norm. In a lot of institutions that talk about integrated presentations, if they have a design collection or craft collection, it's usually relegated to its own galleries. And so I think that this certainly is the case for the three of us, for a lot of our other colleagues who are educating their directors, their fellow colleagues in other departments, so that they understand the relationships between the kinds of objects that we collect and painting, sculpture, photography, works on paper, et cetera, and how you can really enrich the dialogue and enrich the visitor's experience. I chose these two images not just because they're monumental, they were transformational acquisitions, but really to show the breadth of the time frame that we collect. I'm responsible for 1890 to the present internationally in terms of decorative arts and design. My colleague Elizabeth Essner, who is our Windgate curator of craft, she and I work on craft together. But we have the ability to take the long view and to think about a country like the Netherlands and think about how Gerrit Rietveld was so revolutionary, not only for his work in the Netherlands, but the influence of his work across the world, and which still continues to be influential today. And in the very same revolutionary spirit, you have Joris Laarman here with our Dragon Bench. Two different pieces, but both really showing two designers who are thinking through issues, in this case of seating, and doing it at the very highest levels of intellectual thought, of curiosity, of exploration, whether it's of form or material, technologies, what have you. So, I would say that for our collection, we number about almost 7,000 objects. In the decorative arts collection, we have 2 house museums. That number doesn't include those 2 house museums. And because I've been there for 30 years, have had the privilege of building this collection. My predecessor was a late 19th century specialist. So when I came, I was given the opportunity to really think out an entire program. And because of having been here so long, I've been able to develop a lot of relationships with collectors and donors, with gallerists, with colleagues that have allowed a lot of things to come to fruition.
And it's amazing because I visited the museum a few months ago, and now that your main architecture is complete, all of the buildings are unified, I've never really seen anything like it, where there is design everywhere. Yeah. And MFA Houston has an outstanding collection of 20th century jewelry, for example. And you walk into these huge white contemporary art galleries, and there'll be a little box on the wall. And it's just so amazing how it's completely integrated.
Yeah, we really see all of the arts as egalitarian, and that started under my previous director, Peter Marzio. In Houston, we are a relatively new city. It was formed in the late 19th century. It's a very entrepreneurial city. No one really cares where you came from or how old you are, but if you have good ideas, people will let you try. And so that spirit has really been part of the DNA of the institution since its founding 100 years ago.
Well put. My 4th and final contestant and participant, another, I would say, veteran of the Design Miami experience over many years, is Monica Obniski, who is the curator of design and decorative arts at the High Museum of Art in Atlanta. Monica has her PhD from the University of Illinois, Chicago. She had her MA from the Bard Graduate Center of Decorative Arts, Design, Material Culture in New York, which is the 3rd of 3 incubators that we've been talking about. Winterthur, Cooper Hewitt, Bard, in terms of, maybe 50, 60% of the design and decorative arts curators in America probably come from one of those 3 programs. I first met Monica 10 years ago via email, in fact, when you were a curator at the Art Institute of Chicago, and I wrote to you because I was studying at the BGC as an old guy, and I wrote to you to discuss a Pier Smed cocktail shaker in the Art Institutes of Chicago's collection. I got to know Monica much, much better at the Milwaukee Art Museum, where she, in sort of a later variation of a position that you held much earlier, Monica was,
not
and it was
that
endowed
much
at that
earlier.
point. Well, I like to,
Come on.
31 years
telling
later.
us how many
No,
years this is.
I know, but it's more about, it's not about age, it's about experience. I know.
Yeah, keep talking.
Monica was the Demner Curator of 20th and 21st Century Design, and she joined the High in 2020. I've always thought of Monica as one of the great collaborative curators in our field, because of the way she forms partnerships with curators from other museums to produce so many exhibitions. Over the past decade, just to name a couple, Monica co-curated the Scandinavian Design in America show with Bobby Tigerman at LACMA, the Serious Play exhibition on American mid-century design with Darren Dalford of Denver, and the moving, I loved it, the exhibition on Sonia Clark, We Are Each Other, which she produced with the curators at Cranbrook and at MAD. And I think Monica is known, maybe within the context, again, of the fair here, to bring it back to that, for her acquisition of extremely challenging and intellectual international design and craft, which is exactly what we see here on the first, on the first slide here. And the piece that I wanted you to start off with by Amber Cowan over here is a really good example of, since Monica also is responsible for the historical decorative arts in the museum, Amber Cowan, the glass artist here, is a perfect example of a contemporary artist who works well with the earlier decorative arts in the collection and sort of freshens up the room, so to speak.
Thank you, James. And thanks again, everyone, for coming. I think I took the assignment very differently, so my slides will, I feel like, not look like anyone else's, but it's fine, right? I mean, we're here to learn. So James set me up here to talk about the Amber Cowan, and this slide really thinks about opportunities in terms of donations and kind of appealing to funders to make special acquisitions happen. And so with the Amber Cowan piece, James rightly points out, I mean, this is, I think, one of the most amazing glass blowers making work today, and I've been really interested in what she has been doing. But of course, you have to wait for the right piece and the right funder and the right time, right? All of these things have to kind of come together. And as James saw, we recently acquired this work thanks to some wonderful people in Atlanta. And it is installed above a 19th century pier table, and across the way is what I think, one of the most amazing pieces of 19th century furniture, these, Death in the Dining Room, huge muscular pieces of, American 19th century, really virtuosity. And then, pair that with something like the Amber, which is just so feminine, so, just so extraordinary, and has so much storytelling potential. And so those are the kinds of trans-historical interventions that I have been trying to do in the historical collections at the High.
And also it's interesting because Monica did sort of organize her slides in a really cool way, because this is the donation slide, but it's fascinating because this is a different kind of donation as well than, say, the acquisition of a collection, which is what Cindi has done in several cases, or as Nonie has been talking about, the sort of like, getting out there and meeting people and talking to them about what the museum is looking for. In this case, the donation is more about the donors did not own this work and collect it. This is raising money from somebody.
This is getting the tin cup out.
Dialing for dollars.
Right. And the example to the left, Astrid Crow, another fabulous designer who I've been following for many years, and James mentioned the Scandinavian Design and the United States exhibition that I had the great privilege of working on with Bobby at LACMA. And so, I've really kind of developed this deep and abiding interest in all things Nordic, and they're doing some wonderful things these days. And I had the great privilege of stewarding a museum trip to Copenhagen, which is why we had a captive audience in the studio of Astrid Crow. And there is no better way of getting people excited about the work of a designer than having that person talk about the work. And of course, that's why we're all here at Design Miami, is to hear from designers and talk about the work. And Astrid's, when she talks about seaweed in the universe, the thing that strikes me is that, so she's a textile designer, which by nature means that you're quite ordered, right? Warp and weft, all of that. And she is also like a diver and lives at the coast of Denmark. And so she goes swimming every day and looks at nature in very different ways. And she began having these conversations with a Harvard astrophysicist about the order of the universe, because this woman actually began mapping. She was on a team that began mapping the universe, and so they started talking about, like, well, can nature be ordered, and so on and so forth. And so this is a real poetic kind of I think a really poetic way of getting at this idea that the universe is chaotic and unordered, and we should not try to put nature in a box.
Now, while we're with Monica, moving on to the next slide here, the previous slide she'd organized as donations. This one she had organized as exhibitions, because obviously in many cases it is the job of the curator to produce exhibitions, and in the process of planning out those exhibitions to possibly acquire work along the way that will then remain at the museum after the show goes away. And in some cases, for example, if the Noguchi on the work, this is an acquisition that's been made for an exhibition that's not even going to happen yet for another 2 years, for example.
So this slide is dedicated to exhibitions, and I would just say that exhibition making is kind of one of my great loves, and to go back to something that James said about the collaborative nature of these things. So the first work on the left is Broom Thing, which was designed by Stephen Burks, but made by the Broomcraft workshop at Berea College. And this was, actually it was the first exhibition that I pitched when I arrived to the High in 2020. I had wanted to do a show with Stephen, and while we acquired a lot of works from that exhibition, this one for me is the most special one because, and it resonates for lots of reasons. One is, I think it shows the boundaries of design, right? That it no longer has to be this high modernist, functional kind of thing any longer. That design can be expressive, exactly. That it can be expressive, it can be creative, it can be something other than a chair. That it was made in collaboration with students. I mean, this collaborative nature is something that's quite core to me. And also that it was made at Berea College, which for those that might not know it, it's in Kentucky, and it was the first coeducational interracial college in the South. Free tuition. It's an incredible institution. I recommend going. Glenn also recommends going. It's a fabulous, fabulous place.
And there's something very moving. And again, one of the things we can impart anything here is how to read credit lines at museums. And there's something incredibly moving about this, of course, because it's gift of the Berea College student craft. So this is an opportunity for the students that worked on this to actually give to the museum.
Yeah, and they came and saw it in the show, and it was quite a worthwhile experience, I think, for everybody. The second work is like literally brand new as of 2 weeks ago, so I probably shouldn't be showing it, but
has it been officially acquired through the acquisitions committee?
Yes, it has gone through the collections committee, but I was just so darn excited about it. And also I wanted to make mention of this exhibition that I'm collaborating on for 2026 called Isamu Noguchi, quote, "I am not a designer, haha, he was a designer." Case in point, here's an Akari lamp. But the point that I want to make with this slide is that Akari lamps are notoriously difficult to date, vintage, new, all of that. But this particular example is super rare. Look at the feet. It's got these curled feet that we think was an early model. Maybe it was a prototype. But the only time that the curled feet show up are in 1954 photographs of Noguchi's first Akari exhibition at the Shuo Koran Gallery in Tokyo in 1954. And so after this point, they all have plastic feet. This example also has the Japanese Bakelite plug-in, and there are a couple of other wonderful things about it. But this is just a small plug to come to Atlanta in April of 2026, where you could also walk to the playscapes in Piedmont Park, which is Noguchi's only built playground in the United States during his lifetime.
Right, and of course, Noguchi is such a central figure in the market place of 20th century design collecting with the auction houses and with galleries like ourselves. And this is an exhibition that I think we've all been waiting for many, many years because, it's an exhibition that really focuses on the design aspect.
Hopefully there will be some more surprises.
Moving as we continue back down the line to Cindi, the next slide, I think, really is the perfect example of collection building in such a major, major way with one incredible patron. In this case, this is an exhibition that Cindi organized with the collector Dennis Friedman, drawing on both the MFA Houston's earlier acquisitions that Cindi had made in Italian radical design, as well as his new sort of combination sale and donation of the collection here. It's almost overwhelming to talk about here, but the first thing that really jumps out at me, and it's really, you can see it in the lower right hand here, with the Sotsas, the Mendini and the Super Studio, but in the front, that big Gaetano Pesce foot. Cindi is maybe the bravest curator of design in the United States because there's, I would say, probably 99% of all conservation studios at museums would be like, what are you doing? Talk a little bit about your approach to materials. You're not afraid of acquiring work like this for the museum's collection.
No, I'm not, much to the consternation of my conservation department and sometimes the art handlers. One of the things that I think we all strive for in terms of building collections is we want to build collections that not only reflect the important design movements, but also have resonance within the city that the museum exists in. And then we also, none of us want our collections to look like everybody else's. There's nothing interesting about that for us as curators, for you as visitors, to go to museums and see the same thing. That being said, there are certain icons and certain designers that every collection needs to have.
Like a Rietveld chair.
Like a Rietveld chair, which
was,
was the Holy Grail. I waited 20-something years. I have a wish list. That's my once in a lifetime that I'm convinced, if I'm lucky, I might get to check off like 2 items on it. Because sometimes it's just the availability or the cost or what have you. But with the radical design, we pretty much are the only museum in the United States who really collects in depth in this area. MoMA, which did the unbelievably important 1972 Italian landscape exhibition, which looked at Italian production and radical design, shockingly acquired only a handful of pieces on the production side and none on the radical side. There are a few pieces kind of scattered around other institutions, but as James said, we went in big. In this exhibition, which had 64 pieces, we collected, with Dennis Friedman, we brought in 48. So that's a major commitment. The materials are all over the place because the late 1960s into the late 1970s was such an experimental time. As such, our conservators have really taken a leading role in object conservation across the US in dealing with modern materials. And we do know that some of these materials are ephemeral. They are going to degrade. And in fact, I had a conversation with one of our conservators just last week about a piece from the Radical Show, which has been asked for a loan to an exhibition in Germany. And he said, this thing is falling apart. We're not responsible. We won't be responsible if we send it there. And I said, I interviewed the designers. They knew that going into it. It's a miracle that it survives right now, and we can lend it to this very important show by doing everything we can to, crate it and pack it and do all the things we need to do to make sure it goes safely. Am I looking to tour it around the world? No, but for a major, major show, yes. And I'll say one more thing, because I know we're running out of time, but I just wanted to point out the chair that is in, and yes, it is a chair, in the upper right-hand corner by Nacho Carbonell, a Spanish designer. Dennis not only collected Italian Radical, but he had extraordinary, in some cases, one-of-a-kind or early prototypes of contemporary design. He was buying things that nobody else wanted. And fortunately, as a museum, I did. And so we have some incredible things like the Nacho Carbonell from him as well.
I think it's a perfect example of a great match between patron and collector and institution, because yes, I mean, the Italian, our gallery, it's one of our specialties is Italian Radical design from time to time, and the market's not there on the private world. It's a labor of love when you show Italian Radical, and so it makes sense to preserve it in some singular place like this.
Right, and this is an example also of what Monica was talking about, where you have this desire to do this exhibition, you find the works, and you're able to make acquisitions out of them. And so those go hand in hand.
Now, to make a funny segue here, but because we're all lined up this way, our next couple slides are going to shift it completely, because that's just how it happened. And, I think sometimes people have the kind of classic question. So, like, who is the hottest, who is the, singular 20th century designer, crafter, maker, artist who is sort of on everybody's radar simultaneously? Well, Cindi, I believe the MFA Houston is going to be the next stop on the tour of the phenomenal Toshiko Takiezu exhibition, one of several that were, in a sense, organized by sort of like a collaborative group of scholars with Glenn Adamson, with Nonie. And so I'm going to shift over to Nonie on this work here. Nonie also did a separate exhibition on Toshiko that was exclusive to the MFA Boston, but then was a curator on the exhibition that opened up at the Noguchi Contributor that has then been touring around the country here. We've moved from one area of conservation worries, plastic, foamy plastic from the 60s, to another area, fiber, with this remarkable work by Takiezu on the right. And I'm so glad you chose this because, Toshiko in the original Objects USA 1969 catalog was in both the ceramics and the fiber art category. Talk to us a little bit about how you found this work and what it meant to the exhibition as you were putting it together.
That's wonderful. Thank you. We mentioned the show Women Take the Floor that I had the opportunity to work on with many colleagues that opened in 2019. Well, one of the things that came out of that is I really delved into some makers that I knew about but hadn't really worked with before that. And Toshiko Takiezu was one of them. And a few years later, you keep getting referenced, Glano, came knocking and said, hey, I saw you really liked that. I'm working with Noguchi on creating an exhibition. And I was so thrilled to have the opportunity to dive even further into Toshiko. One of the things I noted, and we had shown 7 of her ceramics on a central platform low in a room with Abex paintings by women. And it was a remarkable space. And I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but you walked in there and it just worked. And trying to figure out why. That's what a curator always wants to do. Why does this feel so good? Why do these works gel together so well? And I finally came to the conclusion that it was the Toshiko works in the center of the gallery, that she made all the paintings talk to each other between the gesture, between the colors, and so forth. So I wanted to learn more about this magical artist who had this ability. And so I went down to go to her studio in New Jersey and was there to pick out some ceramics for our exhibition. And talking to the owner of the studio, who was a former apprentice and student of Toshiko, he said, yeah, we've got these textiles in the attic and there's such a burden. I don't know what to do with them. You know, they really need to go to a place that they can take care of them. And so few places can take care of these massive, this is 15 feet wide, textiles. And I sort of went, hi. And I am not in the textiles department. We have a separate department for textiles, but I was on the phone with my colleague, Jennifer Swope, like immediately, and brought her down 2 weeks later. And we ended up acquiring 2 of the textiles that were completely moth-bound. Thank goodness for the moth, because they're all wool, but all the mothballs and everything. I mean, it was unbelievable to see these things just unfurl in front of your eyes. And it was all matted down. And this is like a shag carpet in many ways, this raya rug technique. And the opportunity to be able to show an artist that is working in 2 different media, but creating a similar effect. She actually worked in multiple other media as well, painting as well as bronze, but all of her works have a similar effect. She has a color palette, and you have to get at that color palette in different ways for each of these media. But how she masters her materials, how she masters her way of bringing these effects about, really just fascinated me. And so to have the opportunity to be able to show her textiles with her ceramics was a really wonderful opportunity for us.
And with the vessel on the left by Toshiko, again, let's look at the credit line for a minute. Gift of the Artist, 2007. And I think for any of you out there who are artists who over time build relationships up with curators and museums, there are a few mid-century American artists, several come to mind, that did exactly what Toshiko Takiesu did.
She was absolutely brilliant. I mean, in creating her own legacy. She, in 2006, 2007, started reaching out to institutions across the country who had at least one piece of her work in their collection, who had shown interest in her work. And she said, I'm interested in giving parts of my collection away. Are you interested? And I later heard from her apprentices that were living with her at the time, it was sort of a test. If you wrote back and said, yeah, please send me some images, she was like, yeah. But if you said, I'd love to come and meet you, I'd love to come and see these works and discuss this with you, then you were in. And I was at the MF at the time. I was not the one that was sent down to meet Toshiko, and I so regret that. But my colleague got a chance to go down, and we worked with her, saying we wanted, because of our interest in the history of craft, we wanted to show her the arc of her career. So we really wanted works from each sort of moment in her career. And that's what she worked with us to develop. She gave us 17 works of art in 2007, and she did that at 16 institutions across the country. She quietly placed her collection around. There was a few small exhibitions then, but now there's this, she laid the groundwork. It's just coming out of the woodwork now. Everybody who has Toshiko is thrilled and putting it out. And she created her own legacy in her own quiet way.
And it's interesting because in some cases, if one museum is doing a major exhibition, then the other museums are like, okay, that's great. But I think what's so amazing about her work is that every museum that has a permanent collection of her work is embracing the idea of doing it right now. So for example, Nonie and I were just talking about this. Princeton University Art Museum, when they reopen in the late winter of 2025, they're doing a Roberto Lugo exhibition and they're doing a Toshiko Takiesu exhibition because they too were the beneficiaries of her work, especially as they're the museum really closest to where she's from.
Well, she taught at Princeton for nearly 3 decades.
And there's the Bristol Myers Squibb Gallery down the way. Now, it's interesting. Nonie referenced in Women Take the Floor that incredible installation of Toshiko in front of, was it Joan Mitchell? A Joan Mitchell painting. And right after I saw that, maybe, half a year later, I went to see Crafting America at Crystal Bridges. And there you had something very similar at the time, and which I think led to what we see here as well. Jen?
Absolutely. And it's a different group of works that were on view at the time of that Crafting America exhibition that were on loan from a private collector. And that was also really thanks to Glenn Adamson, who was my co-curator in that project, and to the work that Nonie and others had done an installation at the Yale University Art Gallery. When you have Takeizu's work on view with the work of the painters, and it changes the way that you might view the painting in that room. So being able to see a work by Mark Rothko in conversation with a wood-fired vessel by Takeizu and understanding something different about maybe what the painters are doing by having that conversation across media is moving in exactly the direction that we're really excited and enthusiastic about. So we had a group of works on loan for that temporary exhibition, and that really fueled the desire to have works enter our permanent collection. So we purchased a total of 7 works, and they include 2 of these really phenomenal moon sculptures, which are these vessels that Takeizu made using molds. And so in the photograph, you'll see the one on the far left is this crater moon, and then one that has this really beautiful modeled copper and black surface, the alchemy gold moon. Having these works that are so amazing when in dialogue with paintings from the collection, but then also have multiple layers of resonance. So we've already had these works which entered the collection in late 2021 and then 2022 on view in our galleries in 2 different contexts. And within the next year, they're going to be moved into a different location. And I wanted to note something building on just a comment from Cindi about how many objects are in your area of the collection at the MFA Houston, which she said 7,000. And our collecting philosophy is very different at Crystal Bridges than some of the more encyclopedic museums, not only because our focus is really on work that is connected with the United States. So artists that lived in the US for periods of their career, artists that were born in the US and worked elsewhere, artists that immigrated to the US, some connection with that big unwieldy category that we call quote unquote American art. So we're already in a different kind of level of focus, but our focus is not on collecting in this way that is, we need to make sure we check boxes around, well, you have to have this from this area and you have to have this from there. And instead I would use the word experiential to describe it, because our focus is to have as much work on as much work on view as possible. So we are not collecting for storage, and most institutions do not say that they collect for storage. Nobody says, I would love to have that and hoard it in my little vault.
Very angry with you. Yeah.
So no one, any director is going to say, well, no, we don't do that. But we really have a focus on not having works in storage, and we have a much smaller collection. So it's a total of 4,000 works of art at present, but that includes a lot of works on paper. And I will say that, of course, for things that are light sensitive, we do have that need to rotate things. So it's not that, say, watercolors are on view indefinitely, but things that can be on view and do not have those light sensitivity concerns, we really do aim to have those available for the public. And if not on view in our galleries at Crystal Bridges, on loan to institutions across the country. So we partner with Art Bridges, a foundation that was also founded by Alice Walton, our founder, which if anybody's curious about that, it's a whole thing beyond the talk, so we can chat about it after. But that idea that art collection is really focused, and it's not about, wow, how do you not have a work by that artist in the collection? It's about taking into account all of those practical and conceptual considerations, really prioritizing what is the experience of the visitors as they go through the galleries.
That said, it's interesting, like every time I visit, there's like 1 or 2 new things in the decorative arts that always surprise me, which sort of go, like last time I was there was a fantastic Tiffany lamp. And I was like, oh, because it's just something that pops out, but it makes sense in terms of your mission.
And I think it's going to be really interesting to see as you age how that attitude changes. As coming from an institution that's 154 years old, we've got lots of storage. We got too much storage, but if we would love to put everything on view, but in a museum of the size that I work at, it's pretty common that there's about 4% of your collection on view at any one time.
Yeah, and we rotate like
Yeah.
you do. We
Yeah.
rotate every 6 months. So we are constantly, that's how we keep the displays fresh. That's how we highlight new accessions, new gifts, new thinking. So it's not static.
And you're going to have to keep building new buildings.
You have
So
100,000
more space.
more feet to
I'll say that
fill
one
up.
thing that was not added in the new building is storage. There's not additional
Yeah.
storage. So the excitement around having that gallery space to have, especially as our craft collection has been growing, and I'll say a note when it comes to also credit lines, just pointing out a lot of our energy in collecting in this area has been very generously supported by the Windgate Foundation, which is a foundation that supports craft and education across the country. And Cindi had mentioned a position at your institution.
We have an associate curator and an accessions endowment from Windgate.
And it is both historical craft, like if Toshiko falls into that category, and contemporary craft as well, in terms of where your endowment.
Ours is different, actually. Ours is for living craft artists. So it's very, and also it is meant to support the artists so that the parameters on it are that we acquire through a gallery or through the artists themselves if they don't have representation, but we do not acquire at auction. So it's really also about, our endowment is about supporting, not only building the collection, but really supporting the artists and making sure that they can live and earn a living.
That's fantastic. We're going to have a very fast lightning round as we're out of time here. We have a couple slides. I want to bang through them fairly quickly. There is one more from Crystal Bridges right behind you, Jen. Roberto Lugo. So that's the contemporary side of what the craft endowment is for.
Absolutely, and that was purchased with that Fund for Craft, to which the Windgate Foundation was one of the lead contributors. And this was a work that entered the collection through having conversations with Roberto and his dealer at the time, and having something that was special to Arkansas. So he very generously offered the opportunity for us to talk about what figure might be featured on the vessel, and wanting to highlight a couple native Arkansans. There's this vessel, and then also one that has Sister Rosetta Tharpe. So Scottie Pippen, born in Hamburg, Arkansas, and played at Central Arkansas. Just that connection to
Bulls.
community.
Yeah.
And of course, part of the dream team. People might know him better from the Chicago Bulls.
Which is,
But
for the public, it's an amazing immediate connection, with else. Of course, Nonie does also have a colleague of contemporary craft and design, Michelle Fisher, who's on maternity leave.
There are numerous colleagues in my institution that collect in this realm, and Michelle Millar Fisher is our Warnick Curator of Contemporary Craft, and or actually it's Contemporary Decorative Arts, so covering craft and design. And that position was started in 2010 and really opened up an opportunity for me to have a collaborator to really work with very closely. She tends to focus on the more immediate, such as the 2024 Milkweed and Monarch basket by Teresa Secord. But also we collaborated. She said, I found this lamp by Wendy Maruyama made during her time when she was at Boston University studying. This just seems like a perfect opportunity to bring that into our collection, and I could not have agreed more.
I was so jealous at the time because we were working with Wendy on her sort of iconic chair, the Mickey McIntosh chair, and this was at a gallery down the street, and I saw it and I was like, God, that's so good. And then of course it ends up at the museum. Yeah. Cindi, again, continuing at least on the right hand side of the slide with discussions of craft, although this didn't come through any particular craft endowment.
No, in fact, when we were talking about donors, I just wanted to bring to your attention 2 ways that our Houstonians, everyday citizens, get involved with building our museum's collection for, very, very modest donations. Could be $100. We have 2 collaborations. One is with the Houston chapter of the American Institute of Architects, where in Houston, where they nominate and honor an architect who's made a big contribution to Houston. And I work with that person to find out who their heroes are, their interests, et cetera, and we acquire objects designed by architects internationally with the funds that they raise. So AIA members donate money. We just actually had our acquisition for 2024, a really rare Carlos Scarpa dressing table set. And this collaboration is celebrating its 25 years right now with an exhibition and catalog. And truly, we have tons of donors, and I would say the average donation is somewhere between $100 and $150. But that means that if I've given $100 and I come to the museum and I've donated to, in this case, this Josef Hoffmann work, I feel a sense of ownership and pride. And that's part of the way that a grassroots way that I've gotten people in our community really excited. And the same thing is with the Design Council that acquired the Orly Ougy incredible wildfire fibers tapestry. And this was an acquisition that Elizabeth Essner, my colleague, shepherded. And the Design Council is our department support group, which has very, very modest participation and all participation rates, and all of their funds go to buying design for the collection each year.
So we're basically out of time. We didn't get to all of our slides, but before I pass it back to Glenn, before I ask if anyone has any questions out there, I'm going to do a lightning round because these museum curators also visit other museums. They work with other museums all the time. And for those of you out there who are interested in traveling across the country and seeing different collections, I'm going to start with Monica on the left here. Not including any of your fellow curators and museums here. What is your favorite American museum with a design collection on view that you like to that you think is your best in terms of visiting?
Why does it have to be American?
Okay, you're right. International. You're right. Okay, international.
Because it's freshest, the Design Museum in Copenhagen recently did a fabulous reinstallation with tons of contemporary designers and really showing off their collections in new and interesting ways. So get thee to Denmark.
Ooh. Cindi.
Well, sadly, a few of our, some of my favorites are off view right now. So, LACMA's down, Dallas is down, among other institutions are down. So it's sort of a hard question. I'm going to go international also to say for sheer breadth and depth and just overwhelmingly incredible works, the Pinakothek de Moderne in Munich.
Fascinating. Nonie, as an Americanist,
As
probably
the
doesn't travel
Americanist,
as much
yeah. Well,
internationally.
And I do not get to travel as much internationally, but I would go with a hidden gem that some of you may have heard of that harkens back to my Milwaukee years, but the Racine Art Museum in Racine, Wisconsin is a fabulous collection of craft and just remarkable works there that are really worth the trip. It's just north of Chicago.
And hey, the Milwaukee Art Museum, which is just up the road, that two of you have been through, has an outstanding, viewable permanent collection of hardcore design as well. Jen.
I am going to have to go very close to home to say the Wolfsonian. That I love the Wolfsonian, and they are just such a wonderful institution and one that is very generous also in supporting scholars. I did a fellowship there years ago, and having that opportunity to dive into the things that are not on view, especially in the library side, was really a delight. And I think that if you have time in your Miami schedule to go pay a visit to a beautiful building and collection and exhibitions, that you definitely should.
I'm there every year. We have our chief curator. We have the founding curator here in the audience here. Thank you, everybody.